I am JJ Perez from Inside Runner Sports. That is Greg Luca from the San Antonio Express News coming to you to wrap up UTSA's big 61 to 13 win over Rice. Greg, the Roadrunners played their best game of the season when they absolutely needed to have it. A game of big plays by UTSA. I think that's how I would summarize this one up.
Yeah, I think you were correct when you said last week that this was kind of a must-win game, just from the perspective of even bowl eligibility, which,
Right.
the way they played in that game, it's funny to think that that was something that you would be worried about. This team seems to be like it's capable of playing at a pretty high level. And we can talk about the outlook for the rest of the season and how it's changed now that you've seen a result like this actually play out on the field. But they had to have this one, and they really did deliver in pretty much every phase. You can point to some highlight special teams plays if you really want to. Obviously, the defense had a safety. They scored a couple touchdowns. And then even on offense, we saw Will Henderson break up a couple big runs. Robert Henry didn't have to do a ton, but kind of looked like himself. And Owen McCown showed some signs that I
Yep.
think people will probably be happy with too. So yeah, all around it was just exactly what they would have wanted to see.
Let's start right there with the play of Owen McCown. Some questions surrounding him, right? Obviously, his stats so far up to this point this season haven't been what was expected of him, but another efficient outing. He only had to play one half of football because of how the game played out, but as good as I think we've seen him look, they even took a couple of shots down the field where they were able to connect on some things. The offense looked a little different. He looked a little bit more comfortable. I think after the game, he said that was more of a matchup and some things they saw in film in the Rice secondary. What do you make out of the play of Owen and the offense overall?
Yeah, I don't know that it looked so much different aside from the part where it was working at a really
Yeah,
high level. I still think they called kind of a lot of the stuff that they usually call, and they ran a lot of the things that they usually run. We didn't see there's been a lot of complaints about some of these like third down, draws and screens that they weren't in a lot of tough third
yeah.
downs and the way they were playing. So I think certainly the way they called the game was effective, but I don't know if it was totally different. And I have a bone to pick with ESPN Plus because I tried to watch the game last night and it was missing. And now this morning it's back online when I don't need it anymore. So I'll watch it all the way back later. But, I know that obviously he hit the downfield pass to AJ Wilson
Yeah.
on the first play of the game or the second play of the game. That was a great throw. He hit Wilson again on the touchdown on like the bootleg,
Yeah.
which was another kind of 20 plus yard in the air throw. But I had in my notes that he missed one to McEwen. They had a
Yep.
shot that connected deep. And I think those two were the only really downfield throws that he connected on, which is not a
A
shot at
lot.
him, but I
That's not a
think
lot. Yeah.
but I think it's worth noting that you can still have a really effective passing game when your receivers are healthy enough to make the plays like we saw Devin McEwen catch a short run and take it 50 yards. And we saw DJ Allen catch a short one only about 8-10 yards downfield and break it for the 40-yard touchdown or whatever that was. So, there's different components to that. The receivers can be a part of taking these short gains and turning them into the explosive plays that you need to see in the passing game. And Owen can hit a couple of deep shots like this, and it all comes together into he almost had a new season high for passing, and like you said, he
Yeah.
only played two quarters.
Yeah, let's stay right there with the receivers. I do think there's something to said. Jeff Traylor said this group has been practicing for the better part of 2 weeks, right? Apparently that wasn't the issue, the case before with some guys banged up with nagging injuries and they just kind of got them to the games. And I think we saw that maybe that wasn't effective enough, right? So I think what we asked what DJ Allen brings to the table, and obviously he's a dynamic threat there and kind of opens things up. I feel like for the rest of the group, and we also learned that Willie McCoy may or may not. It's trending that he may not be back at some point this season. So this may be the group that they got right, and then just getting them healthy and getting them into a little bit of flow. And it feels like the more they're going to play together, the better they're going to be.
Yeah, we saw DJ Allen start early in the season, and it was big because he was coming back from that ACL injury last year. And then he turned an ankle at some point. I think it was the Colorado State game and missed a couple weeks. And he still only played, I think it was 8 snaps in this game. So they're still sort of hoping that he's trending in the right direction. The good thing is that AJ Wilson sort of plugs into the Willie McCoy role pretty seamlessly. He's UTSA's top downfield threat now and the guy that they'll look to for those kind of plays. And then we sort of know what Devin McEwen and David Amador can do when they're fully healthy. And we saw late last season Amador be hugely involved in the offense in a lot of different ways and how that opened things up. And so I think that there's probably still something to be unlocked there that they haven't fully tapped into. But I just mentioned the long catch and run for McEwen and how easily he could have had another huge play if Owen would have hit him
Yep.
on that deep shot. So that could have been a monster game for him. So if all those guys are back close to top form, or even if you just have McEwen and Wilson for now,
Yep.
um, and then the others are still getting there. Jamel Hardy played a lot of snaps in this game. I don't know if that
Yeah.
means he's full go or if he'll be involved quite a bit, but he's at least working his way back. So between the guys who are good and the guys who are getting there, I think there's some promising signs.
We saw a breakout performance by redshirt freshman Will Henderson on his birthday. Two touchdowns, two dynamic runs. Robert Henry ran hard too. He had a nice day of production and some limited rushing attempts. I mean, is the running game back? It kind of went away for one game. I think that's a big question moving forward. Are they still confident in that run game?
Yeah, if this is going to be a thing with Robert Henry, where every week they're talking about how to manage his workload and hydration and things like that, and there's going to be times where he might not be available for a drive or where they need to make sure they're alternating, at least it's good for UTSA to know that Will Henderson, and he had shown this already, but to have the production to match that he's able to step in and produce at a pretty high level because we had always known from the moment he was recruited how fast he was and what
Yeah.
he could do on the track and how that might translate to the field. But we did not expect that he'd be as tough of a runner as he's shown to be.
Yeah.
And he didn't really have to put that on display much against Rice, but you just go back and watch his runs against A&M, and he's just not afraid to get in there and mix it up with even athletes at that level. So I think that there's certainly something there. And that's to say nothing of whether it's, we got our first look at John Emery
Yeah.
and Bryson both coming back from a hamstring injury. And um, Amarian Peterson was
Yep.
kind of the goal line back early in the season, and we'll see what kind of role he carves out going forward. So, last year that was supposed to be where they were loaded at running back, and this year maybe there was a little bit lower expectations, but it seems like that room is at a pretty high level at this moment.
I wanna talk a little as much as we can about the defense because I feel like they deserve some flowers after this one. But before we wrap up the offense, I wanted to ask you what you made about the play calling. A lot of questions and a lot of angst surrounding UTSA's offensive coordinator leading up to this game. Jeff Trader said he was not gonna make a change in who calls the plays. Um, some questions about, Jeff Trader holding the play call sheet on the sideline during this game. I think it's something he does every game. So he said today they haven't changed anything. So what did you make of what we saw from an offensive coordinator standpoint this last game?
Yeah, it's not too different from what we said last week, where we know that this group is capable of producing at a high level, and we know that this group is capable of starting slow and then being a top 20, top 15, even top 10 offense by the end of the season. And so it's probably not surprising that Jeff didn't want to make any major changes, especially, with Owen. We talked about that to death last week too, and it's obvious why they left him in there. So I think that there's not a ton of shocking things there. Even when the offense wasn't working really well, I'd come on here and give them credit for these one or two kind of
Yep.
gadget plays that they come out with in the scripted portion of the game. And we saw another one of those. I think we got one of those, direct snap to Robert Henry, handoff to Owen, throw plays, and there was a couple other. They always have something that looks a little bit different, either formationally or something they come up with a covert pass or something sneaky that they're doing. So I think that the creativity is where it needs to be, and then it's just about pushing the right buttons at the right
Yep.
time and identifying your matchups. Owen said after the game, which I almost thought it was uncharacteristic, but he said that he felt like Rice's defensive backs were an area that they could attack, and so
Yeah.
they really went for it. You can see his confidence level. I don't know. I don't believe when Jeff says that he doesn't see the criticism, but I almost believe Owen when he says it because
You're
like
right.
Even
He's like, what are you
the
talking
Temple
about?
game, yeah, after the Temple game, he was like, getting to talk to him there, and I didn't have video, so other people haven't seen it, but it was just like he just was like, yeah, we made some progress in the passing game today, and hopefully we can keep this going. And all the fans, are horrendously mad at him and all that stuff, but he's like, yeah, we're making progress, we'll get there. So he's a confident guy, and I think we could talk about his health. I don't know. They say everything's fine, and he says everything's fine. I wish I had watched the game in full before this moment, but I do
Yeah.
know even on just the highlights I reviewed, there's a play where they score the touchdown. I think it was DJ Allen's
It's
touchdown, and he's
smoked.
not out there
Yeah.
celebrating. He comes
Yeah.
off right away, and when UTSA we had a pretty big lead on UIW and played pretty deep into the game, and we asked about it after, and Jeff was talking about, you guys saw what happened at Tulsa last year, and so even with the sizable lead that UTSA had coming out for the second half, and especially to score two defensive touchdowns before they
Yeah.
would have had to be on the field, it makes sense that they would pull him just game situation wise. But we saw Robert Henry was out there for the
Yeah.
first couple plays too. Jeff said today it'd be nice to get Brandon Tennyson some reps with the ones, and I get that, but that was not a concern earlier. So
Right.
I don't know if there's something going on there. We're not going to find out, but it just has seemed like there's moments where he's sort of shied away from contact or not wanting to get hit, which is just out of character for how tough we know that he is. So I think maybe there's room to give him a break on that front, and then also just the performance is at a place where on any standard, he's playing up to par at this moment.
Yeah, and I do think maybe his best football is still ahead of him. I do think he's a tough kid, right? He took some big shots. He's taken some big shots the last few weeks, and I think that has impacted his game. So we'll see. Hopefully, there's no lingering effects. Let's talk about the defense, and I do think we might have seen a little bit of Owen McCowan had the defense not played so well in that second half. You hit on it. Almost a dominant performance in the first half stifling. They knock out two quarterbacks, and Rice gets kind of I call it a cheapy touchdown at the end of the half, but they earned it, right? And you think, hey, maybe they could have some momentum in the second half, but UTSA's defense comes down and just shuts that down right out of halftime.
Yeah, as I'm remembering it, I think they only gave up the one big run. I mean, otherwise it
Yeah,
seemed like they were pretty sound. But the thing that stood out to me the most was just the way they were hitting in this game. And I don't
right.
know if that was the product of the type of offense you're up against, where it's either like find the ball and go get it, or that's your man and just go get him, So I feel like they might be able to play a little bit more downhill in this kind of a matchup than they would be otherwise. Jeff Traylor said this morning that it was like a frustration sort of thing from
Yep.
last year and getting to rewatch some of the film of that game. Now, I don't know why they would have watched a ton of film of a different Rice team with a different offense unless they just wanted to get the guys mad. So maybe that was all part of the
Yeah.
game plan to begin with. But I do think that we saw a different level of physicality, just specifically with the linebackers, the way that Shad Banks and Kendrick Blackshire were just playing downhill and getting into the backfield and really putting some major hits on guys. But we even saw it was KK Meyer who had the big hit on the
Yeah.
quarterback near the sideline, right? And so it's just, I think a little bit of everybody kind of bringing that physicality. Maybe it's just easier to play downhill against a team that isn't going to pass it much, especially once their quarterbacks start getting knocked out of the game the way they were.
A program record for tackles for loss. No really big star there. I think I saw two, one and a half, one, a bunch of halves. So kind of a total team effort there. And you talk about a team that at one point you didn't know how good this defense was going to be to where, I know there's still maybe some questions with some coverage and some certain aspects of the defense, but for overall, I mean, they seem to be trending upward as a defensive unit.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw against Colorado State was that the third game of the season where they were capable of playing at a pretty high level, or fourth game, a pretty high level as a unit that had 11 new starters to come together and be able to, even against an offense that was struggling the way that they were, to be able to deliver that kind of a performance was pretty surprising that quickly on of this group coming together. And yeah, I do think, against an elite passing team, which they're going to see sooner rather than later, we will see how they hold up in that kind of a test. But certainly, uh, there's been times in the past where Army's given them trouble. Like it's not like defending the option is a gimme for them either. So to deliver this kind of a game against Rice was, yeah, it can only be considered very promising.
Let's touch quickly on special teams before we move on. I think a decent day. We saw a bunch of kicks on kickoff out of the end zone. Petro hit a nice 45-yarder. Excuse me. The punt return and punt coverage was pretty good. I know there was a muff punt there by Bro, but he had a pretty good return there that was also, really exciting. So overall, that unit seems like they're trending upward as well.
Yeah, you covered it. The muff is alarming. You don't want to see something like that. That could cost you a game in a more tight moment. But generally speaking, that's the only sort of red flag where it felt like early in the season you'd be flagging 5 or 6 special teams plays a game as something that was problematic. Going back all the way to the safety when on the errant punt snap and how costly that proved to be. So I think that they've solved a lot of their issues there, or at least patched them up as far as this game is going. So yeah, I think a pretty promising day for special teams.
61 points by the Roadrunners, a new program record. A lot of that with the offense, some of that with the defense. Um, Greg, what are the general thoughts coming out of this one? It feels like to me the Roadrunners lost a tight one to a Temple team that maybe is going to be a little bit better than we thought they were going to be, and won a big one against a Rice team that maybe isn't as good as we thought they're going to be. So where this team is at is maybe somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I think we came away from the game last week with Jeff saying, this team's getting better and nobody wants to hear it, but we played pretty well. And if we just keep on that trajectory, we could still have the kind of year we want to have. And the fans, thought it was the worst thing that's ever happened and everybody should be fired or benched. And I think you and I on this video landed somewhere in the middle where certainly It'd be great if they could go in there and blow out Temple or even just come out with the close win at the end. But from that perspective, it really wasn't that it wasn't as alarming as some of the things we saw last season where how many teams did they lose to who had their coach fired, and we saw that that UTSA team could eventually get into form and produce the kind of season that they wanted to have. So I think it was reasonable to think that this group could round into form sooner than later, and this is the first sign of that. I don't This is probably better than any kind of result we saw in the early half or even the first 7 or 8 games of last season, where before they had that where they got it all together against Memphis, there was a lot of bleak moments. And I think this year's blips on the radar have been a little bit less. And the games that they've lost, they played pretty well in. Texas State was kind of like a toss-up game, and Temple was kind of like a toss-up game, and maybe Colorado State was too much that way for comfort. So, they're 1-2 in those close games, and so the record could be a little bit different from what it is now if that goes their way. But it's interesting I like the metrics that in the S&P Plus UTSA is eighth among G5 teams. So I sent you yesterday. They're 61 and Tulane is 64. And
Yeah,
so if that game was played this week, UTSA to be favored against Tulane. And I don't think anybody who follows either of those teams would inherently think that, but that's just what the numbers say at this point, because I think the reaction to UTSA's losses has been orders of magnitude stronger than the actual shortcomings that they
right,
showed on the field.
right.
So, this is what it looks like when they catch all the breaks and the other team has a couple injuries and things actually go their way.
Well, the Roadrunners are 3-3 overall, 1-1
Yeah. So,
go ahead. Go ahead.
how are you feeling? Like, do you think that this is a team that's in position to contend now, or like,
I,
what are your
I
thoughts?
was I was just gonna get to it. The Roadrunners are kind of at this pivotal point of the season where you gonna see what you're really made of, right? The gauntlet of schedule is now. North Texas is good. Tulane is decent. South Florida may be the best G5 team in the nation. You get those teams in back-to-back games, and it starts with this North Texas game, and it's not. I think when we first saw the schedule, I don't know that we thought it was going to be this difficult, this conference play, but that's what it's morphed into. And, from a UTSA standpoint, I think it's a great opportunity to show how much you have improved, how much you can continue to improve. And look, with all due respect to the Texas State game, this is the rivalry game, in my opinion, for the Roadrunners. It's the longest standing, series. And we've seen where the records do not matter in this matchup. And I mean, you could look at this matchup from both sides and you could see how a win or a loss on either side could turn each program season in a different direction. So, yeah, it's exciting. It's a big one. I think UTSA's best football is still ahead of them, and it's a big opportunity this week at North Texas.
Yeah, it's way too early at 1-1 to be having this conversation, but I'm going to do it anyway. When you look around the league at how many strong teams there are between North Texas and Tulane and USF and Memphis and Navy, all like starting out really, really strong, teams are going to beat each other up. And UTSA is pretty lucky. I think I missed one in there I might not have said Tulane, but basically UTSA plays three of the other five teams that I consider to be at a pretty
Yep,
high level, and everybody in that group is going to play a bunch of the other teams. So
right.
if you can come out of a conference season with two losses, you might have a shot at playing for the league title, just depending on how it breaks. So I think that again, they have to, beat some of these strong teams to even be in that discussion at this point. But it's just going to be an interesting conference race where sometimes it seemed like in the past, if you slipped up once or twice, you were out of it just
Yeah,
because you sort of knew which teams at the top were going to take care of business. And I don't think it's that way this year.
right.
Everybody's going to have and then we saw Navy came close to losing to
Yep,
Temple. Obviously,
yep.
UTSA did lose to Temple, and East Carolina gave Tulane a scare. Like even outside of that group, there's teams that are playing at a high enough level. I don't think I said Army where they can jump up and beat one of those teams too. So I just think the league overall is so much stronger than anybody would have expected, and even relative to other G5, G6 conferences, that this is going to be probably kind of a bloodbath, and maybe somebody will
Yep.
come through it scathed. But even if they do, there's two spots in that title game.
Right.
There's going to be a 2 or 3 loss team potentially that ends up in the mix for that.
I think I would double down on kind of what Jeff Traylor hinted at. Like, how many conference games have his teams like not shown up in? Like, how many
Mhm.
games have they not been? They haven't won all of them, right? But certainly they've been. in more of their fair share. I think he says two, right? There's two times they haven't shown up. So I do think
Well,
they're gonna have a shot.
well, what'd you say, JJ? Is it 21 and 0?
Yeah, 23 if you count the if you count the I feel like you got to count the title games. They count more, right?
Yeah,
But
no, true.
yeah,
I should have factored that in. Yeah. So
21
shout
and
out to
0.
the
Yeah, 21 and
those
0
of
at
you who
home.
watch the press conferences will get
Yep.
it. And
Yep. Jeff Traylor kind of feeling himself a little bit and a little jab to all the people asking for his coordinators to be fired, who were also, by the way, given some coordinator of the week award today somewhere. So, well,
sure.
yeah, who knows about that? But yeah, I do think overall moving forward, the Roadrunners have to feel some confidence that they have been playing better, that they can continue to play better. But certainly this North Texas matchup, Greg, is going to give. I mean, it's going to give this defense fits. That quarterback is legit. That offense is dynamic, and Eric Morris has done it again, with this type of offense.
Yeah, I was gonna say you just sort of know what you're gonna get from a North Texas team at this point, and pulling it up and looking at them last night and watching some of the highlights and just checking the numbers. It's exactly what you see from a from an Eric Morris team where basically they are really good passing the ball and they're going to pass it a lot, but the running game is way better than you expect when
Yeah,
you think about how that team profiles, and they're going to pick up a lot of yards on the ground too. And defensively, they are really bad against the run because they hope you never get to run the ball. They hope
yep.
that they're
You
playing from
gotta,
ahead and you're
yep.
playing from behind and you have to pass it. And they do pretty well in the pass game. I think they'd probably like to create a little bit more havoc and maybe a little bit more turnovers than we've seen so far for that style to work on the defensive end. But generally, the offense has been clicking at a pretty high level. I think it's a really interesting situation for them. They do have, they have an extra day if
Yeah.
for whatever you want to make of that. But I think more importantly, they're coming off of this hugely momentous hosting a conference game against a top 25 ranked team.
Emotional would be a good word.
Right. They pulled in the biggest crowd ever. And then apparently a lot of those people left by the third quarter because they gave up 28 unanswered points or something like that within a 5 minute stretch or so, and ended up taking a big loss. So how do you, as North Texas, regroup from that? I think it's going to be really interesting. I imagine with the rivalry stakes and the extra day to sort of get your composure back, that it's going to be probably a non-issue, but it is sort of telling to see what kind of a hangover there might be and how that impacts what the attendance looks like and the atmosphere there. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff from their side too. And I do think in that game, I mean, obviously South Florida's a really elite team, but the it was the most shaky I think we've seen their quarterback look too. Messamaker's gotten a lot of headlines this year, and I just think they really kind of rattled them a little bit. So we'll see how he bounces back from that because as the offense goes, he goes.
Yeah, I do want to give South Florida a shout out there. That's an elite defense, right? I feel like they've invested well, especially with their front seven, and that showed in that matchup. I do think for UTSA though, for me, it's obvious, right? You gotta limit the passing down the field, the big plays, right? But for the UTSA offense, what are they able to do against that defense? Can they still run the ball? Can they keep up, right, offensively? And how does that defense look? I don't know if you remember, North Texas actually fired their defensive coordinator after last year's UTSA game. So, they're a little bit better defensively. I think they hope that, and we'll see if UTSA can capitalize on that.
Yeah, it makes sense that UTSA would be able to run the ball against North Texas, and we'll see if that actually plays out on the field. And obviously, we've seen if they can do that, then that makes it life easier in the passing game, which is just kind of common sense. And so then, if you can deliver a situation where Owen can make some of the open throws that he was able to make against Rice, then could be another productive day for the offense. Usually, UTSA has won four in a row in this series since the devastating 11-0 loss in Denton in 21. So there's been some success on UTSA's side of the ledger in this one recently, and so I know North Texas will want to get back from that. But it seems like the Roadrunners at least sort of have some idea of how to match up against this system.
Yep, this for me, Greg, this is as big as it comes for UTSA. You have you're a 4.5 point underdog to a really good team on the road. You're coming off a really big win. You feel confident, and it feels like if you could get this one, it sets you up for maybe to get on a roll for the rest of the season.
Yeah, and I don't know how this impacts it at all, but they do have sort of an open week after that because they have like
Yes.
10 days until the next game. So, because they play on a Thursday the following week. So, you know, maybe there's just a little bit of like a finish line kind of thing where it's like you just can put everything into this game because you have that little bit of a break after. Not that they wouldn't anyway, but I think mentally it's probably just a little bit nicer to have that kind of a segmented deal. But unlike Coach Traylor, and I'll ask him more about this tomorrow, he's already been talking about this upcoming slate as a whole of like how
Gauntlet.
tough
Called it a
of how
gauntlet.
tough the schedule
Yeah.
is. And usually it's just a 1 week at a time thing. So I wonder if that's how they're framing it internally too, where you have to be ready for all of this, or if it's just really truly the 1 week at a time mentality where we have to go get this one this week. So I'm curious how they've been kind of pitching that.
Yep, we'll see. Though I think that Tulane game got picked up on the main ESPN for that Thursday night you alluded to. So we'll see. We'll see how the Roadrunners look, how they get past this week. We'll see how it plays out on the field Saturday. We'll both be there, Greg. I appreciate you jumping on. I think that'll do it for this week. I'm JJ Perez from Inside Runner Sports. That is Greg Luca from the San Antonio Express News. We appreciate everybody watching. Thanks.